Welcome to Sundays at Cafe Tabac, the podcast. Hi, I'm Wanda Acosta.
Hi, I'm Karen Song. We're the filmmakers of the documentary feature film project of the same name that's still in progress.
This podcast series is an extension of our film's mission to affirm and extol the courage, vision, strength, and joy in our LGBTQ community through the preservation and sharing of our personal stories and the collective histories we live through and change.
We often discuss whether it is still necessary to come out today, since there is a level of acceptance and visibility that did not exist in the past, with many rights won for our community. We also discuss coming out as a celebratory and self-empowering moment in one's life. But we want to also acknowledge that for many, it is still very difficult and unsafe to do so.
For all of these reasons, we want to emphasize why we do this podcast, because we believe these stories were as timely then as they are now. We believe in the importance of telling and preserving our personal stories and our collective histories as forms of visibility and activism, and as sources for empowerment and inspiration. In this episode, we welcome Javier Peral, an internationally known sound stylist, music producer, and music director, renowned for his intrinsic approach to sound design. He is one of the most sought-after names for fashion show soundtracks, as well as creating music for art videos, performance, and film. Born and raised in Madrid, Javier has been a fixture on the music scene since arriving in New York City in the early 1990s, where he was a DJ at the beloved East Village queer space, Wonderbar. In this episode, Javier brings us to his teen years in Madrid, where he discovers his sexuality, goes to his first gay club, gets outed by his mom, and much more. This podcast episode was recorded at the Newstand Studios at Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. Now let's listen to Javier Peral.
I came out to myself first because I think that's really important to acknowledge without prejudice that you are gay. In those days, the word gay wasn't something that really reflected the whole spectrum of gay people. But in those days, being gay was a strange label. I remember we used to drive by the gay club, which was the only cabarets that were openly gay because they had a drag show. And it had a neon on the front door that had like this very cartoonish face of a drag queen. It was called the gay club. So to me, gay equal drag queens in those days. So I started saying that when I was like maybe 11. So that was my image, because I'm talking about the late 70s or mid 70s. We didn't really have any examples of homosexual people where deviants, and at least in Spain. I mean, there was still a law that you could go to jail, you could get picked up at a raid. There was La Ley de Maleantes. It was a really kind of like gray spectrum where, like, if you were in the middle of the street and the police thought that you were doing something strange, they can take you to jail. It is post-Franco days, so many of those laws continue after. Slowly, I started seeing other examples, and one was this news kiosk where they would sell books and magazines and newspapers. They had a few books in one of the windows, and one was a paperback of a book called Los Homosexuales in Español. And it had a photo of like two guys that were like kind of hot, staring at each other's eyes, and they had like tight jeans and all that. And I was like, that's different. So I really wanted to buy it. I never brought myself to. It was right next to high school, so I never brought myself to. But I started kind of like being more aware that there were other types of homosexuales or personas gay. I was swimming, kind of small swimming club that functioned summer, winter, because they had an indoors Olympic swimming pool. And funny enough, that swimming pool became later like a gay cruising hangout place in the summer. And that kind of added the new element of like desire and being desired and being able to like awaken desire in other people, which to me was kind of a revelation. And I decided that it was completely fine and that it was like an awakening of sexuality. And so I was like, I want this. There's nothing wrong with this in my head. This is great. This is what I want to be. And to me, to discover that was like I could only think of that. And I would go and swim at lunchtime. It wasn't far from my school. And, from my parents was such a great idea. I was like, oh yeah, go swimming. So that led to started going out with people that I met there. That took me to the first gay club when I was 16. Started going and meeting people. And I was living with my parents, so I was sharing, obviously, the home phone number. So voices starting to call this number. So that also created some sort of red flags. This mixed in with a change in habits and a change in going out and arriving late and past my curfew and all this, change in clothes, because the first time that I went to a gay bar, I was wearing 16-year-old clothes. I had no clue what I was putting on together. And I arrived and I see all these stylish kids, some of them flamboyant, some of them not. It was the early 80s. They were wearing giant shoulder pads. And I am like with my glasses, because I had glasses at the time, like no clue. So luckily my brothers were both stylists, so I started borrowing their clothes. Those were things that my parents probably were picking up. Coming out to my parents was a different story. It was by age 18 that I already had a really big group of friends, and I was going out, and I had, by then, a few boyfriends, and that I met Rafael, who was a film editor, lived in New York, and who was super sophisticated and fun and great, and we had a few months relationship. I was very young. I was only 18, and he was 31 or something. So he wrote me a letter, and I received the letter. It was kind of like a breakup, very sweet. He was a smart guy. He didn't write anything terrible. Kept it in my pocket, and that night I got drunk, because that's what we did in the summer in Efkaray. And I got really drunk. And I arrived home, and I just went to bed with my clothes on, and my mom was furious because she heard me. And so she took off my clothes and put them in the washer. And she always had this habit to pull things from the pockets, so nothing was washed. And she found the letter. She kept the letter for months, which was kind of amazing in a way, until one day Rafael called me. We were in Madrid at the time, and I was at home, and my mom challenged Rafael to, who are you and what do you have to do with my kid? And why are you calling him? And I know the letter that you wrote him, and what's going on. So Rafael, who was, like I said, was a really nice and smart guy, praised me and said, you have a wonderful son. He's incredible. He's amazing. He's obviously young, and I'm older, but I have nothing to fear about your kid. Your kid is incredible. Love him, help him, and basically that's what he says. So that night I arrived home, I don't know where I was coming from, but it was after dinner, and my mom served me dinner in the kitchen instead of the dining room, which was weird. We closed the door, and she confronted me. It was very solemn. And by then my group of friends had advised me, if you ever get in that situation when your parents are like, are you gay? Or you are gay? Or question you anything, stand up. Just say yes and say, so what? And I took courage out of nowhere. I don't know. And I just told my mom that, yeah, it was the truth. And of course, she became very oh, es una cruz que me ha mandado el Señor. It's like the Catholic guilt, she's got to carry a cross and all this. And I'm like, Mom, please, don't be so dramatic. we just went on for what it seemed to be hours. I know they went to see their priest in the church that they were going to mass, and he said the same thing that I said. Apparently, he was quite modern and open-minded. It took a few months to solidify this whole coming out. I could see her; she was sad and she was a little depressed. And sometimes in the morning, she would wake me up in my room and ask me if I had changed, if there was any possibility of change. And I said, "No, Mom, this is what it is." My mom's behavior from the moment of the letter to the phone call was a little hostile. She was angry and everything was very exacerbated and dramatic. In my 20s, Madrid was La Movida and Pedro Almodovar, and imagine like any movie of Pedro Almodovar, that's exactly what Madrid was, and we had so much fun. And I was very reckless, and I did a lot of things that kind of upset my parents sometimes. But I would say a month and a half after the phone call, my mom became this very protective, very loving, very warm mother, and continued that for the rest of her life. And she was always like, I could sense that there was a change, and she embraced me and she adored me. And it was, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional now. But the one thing that was sweet in that situation was that what she was afraid of is that other people could harm me. Her homophobia wasn't so much about homophobic feelings, homophobic tendencies towards gay people, as like that homophobia informed her that other people could do harm to me. That's what she feared. Still, she always was this loving, protective person, and she would like wave at me when I was leaving, going out at night or like afternoon, and wave through the window, give me a little extra cash if my father wasn't that generous that day. She became this really attached mother. When I started going out to gay clubs, it was like the era of the new romantics, like Visage and the Human League and Ultravox and all this, or Spandau Ballet, with like a lot of like pirate ruffles, scarves, skirts even, and like I had to wash them. And I got a bunch of them that a friend of mine brought from London, from Portobello Market. So my mom had to wash them, and she was always very embarrassed to dry them, because we had lines clothes. Like in Spain, there's no dryers, so she would flip them, and so the neighbors wouldn't see the clothes have ruffles, how the shirts have ruffles. And then she was like, "Well, maybe I can say they're mine and instead of yours." And she started to like some of them. Like, I like the black one better than the white one. The first guy that I met at the pool, I don't know, a married guy, older than me, I had a big Speedo to swim because it was one of those like older 70s, kind of like wide leg. And so he bought me a new one, more slim and like narrow on the, on the hips, with a flower pattern. And that I didn't show my mother, and I had to wash myself and dry it myself because it was quite provocative. My father had a bunch of suits from the 60s that they wouldn't fit him anymore, and ties from my grandfather that were too skinny. So I asked my parents, "Hey, do you need this?" And they were like, "What are you going to do with this?" I was like, "I'm going to start wearing this." And they were like, "Why? Where are you going with this?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's trendy. It's what kids are wearing now." And they were like looking at me like, "How do you know this?" I found out later that my father knew as well. He actually never confronted me. And unfortunately, he died when I was 24, so I never discussed this with him. Great thing about coming out and starting to meet other older peers, because I said before that there was no examples. And in the early 80s, there weren't that many examples either. I mean, if you remember, I don't even know if Elton John was out or Freddie Mercury wasn't either. And many stars, like Rock Hudson, wasn't out. He only came out when he became ill with AIDS. There was really no examples for us. So to have a community that embraced me, and not just sexually, because many of my friends, we became friends, and many of them were 9, 10 years older than me. They were very protective, and they were also very encouraging in giving you all their knowledge. So they're like, you need to read Tennessee Williams' memoirs. They're great. Or you need to start reading Marguerite Yourcenar memoirs of Haiti. Like, I remember all these books that was like, do you know about Yukio Mishima? I'm like, no. Okay, start reading this. They would take me to see Pasolini and Visconti and Truffaut. It was like this knowledge that was transferred from these guys that in reality is like, listen, you're going to be in a world where like some queens are not going to be that nice to you. And if you go to a dinner party, you need to know all this. It was a very caring act on their behalf. It was like, do you know who this artist is? No, let's go and see this. And it wasn't like with any like patronizing or no, it was just like to expose you to like, pass on information. It was great. I discovered Warhol, Mapplethorpe. I met artists. It was just a great amount of knowledge that for a 20 or a 19-year-old felt like, wow, this is the world. This is a lot more interesting. When I moved to New York, I started working at a clothing store, Camouflage, in Chelsea, which was like one of the most revered menswear store in New York City, small menswear store. And one of the owners, Gene Chase, who unfortunately died of AIDS in '96, took me under his wing, and he would take me out to jazz clubs and plays and performances and all this. I was perhaps 29, 28, but maybe he saw me like, a deer in the headlights in New York, and it was probably my second job in the city. So, and he was the same, this very caring, thoughtful, older guy. I think he was like twice my age, if not more. He and Robert Richards, another great older character of New York, who was an illustrator and took me to see great performances. They were enjoying their moment. They were also enjoying taking me and wowing me with all this knowledge. I feel there was a generation of gay elders. AIDS sort of took so many away that a lot of that was lost. I remember, like, in the 80s, there was a much more crossover from like older to younger. In my group of friends, someone could be 10 years older than me or 12 years older than me, and there was not an issue. I don't think we ever really thought of the possibility of getting married. Right after I came out, there were people already saying, it's like, oh, this is my husband. And I'm like talking about like even 30 years before gay marriage. And we were always kind of like, ew, like, no, it's your boyfriend, not your husband. Like, saying my husband meant something else that obviously it wasn't real because, marriage didn't exist. And the implication was kind of like a little too heavy. For some reason, we thought we were freer or special, and we didn't need marriage. My dating experience was kind of a disaster too, because I couldn't last in any relationship, and I blame myself for a lot of it. But marriage and meeting Ross changed my look, my perspective in love, and my perspective in being with someone for hopefully the rest of my life. I am right now living with my husband Ross in the North Catskill area in Durham, in our house, escaping COVID. My husband and I have been married for 9 years, a little bit over 9 years. We got married in Spain. 2 weeks after it was announced that New York was passing same-sex marriages, we got married in my hometown in La Rioja with all my family and his family and a bunch of friends. And it was like, it's a common Spanish description, una boda gitana, because gypsy weddings usually take over a whole weekend or a few days of celebration. And ours went from a Wednesday night to a Sunday morning. So it was a long, long, long wedding with a lot of events and a lot of fun. They met briefly. My mom had Alzheimer's, and so the last 3 years of her life, there was a decline. She didn't make it to the wedding. She died a year before. So Ross kind of met her in her last year. She was at a facility or a residence, and so I brought Ross with me. We went out to the garden and they sat together. And she was in a wheelchair by then. And so she kind of like looked to the side and she said in very clear Spanish, ¿Quién es este? Who's this? I introduced, this is Ross. He lives with me in New York. I didn't say anything else. She grabbed his hand and sat there without saying much. And at that point, my brother arrived and saw that, and it was like this moment. She gave the approval to us, yeah, in that moment.
Thank you for listening. For more, subscribe to Sundays at Café Tabac, the podcast. You can learn more about us and our film at cafetabacfilm.com and at Café Tabac Film on social media.
Please share your thoughts with us on our social media, and if you have a coming out story you'd like to share for a possible feature here, reach out to us. Thanks for listening.